Well, my text this morning is 2 Kings chapter 5, and we've reached verses 9 and 10. 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. I don't need to explain again, but just mention it, that I'm looking at this passage not at the historical event of the curing of this man from his skin complaint, but as an illustration of the gospel. I've tried to justify that in the past, but I'll just go on now, assuming that I can do that. 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. And we've reached the place where, you remember last time, Elisha, in some sense of frustration, I should say, had seen that this Naaman, this man from Syria with this terrible skin complaint, had been going down what I call blind alleys, been looking for success or help or cure in the wrong place. And Elisha, in some sense of frustration, says, tell him to come here, and then he'll find there is a prophet. And last time we looked at that. Now, this morning, we're at the place, verse 9. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot. Let me just pause there and go back to verse 5. He wouldn't just have the horses and his chariot. Remember, in verse 5, I noticed it as I read it to you, he took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of raiment. They were all gifts, I presume, to pay for any help that he might receive from this terrible blight in his life. So he came and stood at the door, verse 9, of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan, and so on, 7 times, and you will be clean. 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. Now, before I start, or at least I'll start this way, not exactly by making an apology, but I use the word apologia, which is apology, by way of explanation. I want to confess that this is probably the worst sermon that you will ever hear with regard to the construction. I'm not nervous, but I'm a bit apprehensive, shall I say, about speaking on, saying what I'm going to say. The only thing is, well, there's 2 things. One is, I think it can be found in these 2 verses. I wouldn't do it otherwise. I think it is fairly there. But the other thing is, what I'm going to say to you, I'm afraid for some of you it might just be meaningless, but I hope it's not, because to me, I passionately believe what I'm going to say to you. Very much so. And I hope that comes across. I'm not just saying this because I like the idea of it. It really grips me, this. I feel this is something very important. Have you ever thought about it? There's something in all our lives, some part of our life, which figures very largely in our lives, but nobody ever explains to us from beginning to end what we're supposed to be doing in this activity. What I'm talking about is what we're doing here this morning. I'm up here talking to you, and you're down there listening to me. Preaching, okay? Now, when you think about it, preaching one way or another has featured in my life since 1956. Nearly 70 years. I don't know how many sermons I've been involved in. For most of that 70 years, I've been involved in sermons where I am now, actually preaching the stuff. Some of you have been at this business more than 70 years, and all that time you've spent listening to the stuff. But twice every Sunday, once in the week, I don't know how many other times, sermon after sermon you've heard. And sermon after sermon I've preached. Just think at the moment how many millions of words are being uttered as I speak to you now. I'm turning to passage in Hebrews 5. I invite your attention to Zechariah 6, or whatever it might be. It's going on and on and on, isn't it? We're loaded down with sermons, aren't we? For most of my life, I've been up here, or equivalent. But in the past few years, through circumstances, the balance has changed in my life. And I'm more often now in the equivalent place where you are. I'm listening to these sermons. I used to give them, but now I'm listening more. And I've noticed something. I'm not the first to notice it. I've read Martin Lloyd-Jones on preaching and preachers. Some of you have done the same. But to say I'm disturbed is to put it mildly. I certainly am disturbed. The point I'm trying to make is this, that in 1956, I was converted. That was more or less when I began to start hearing sermons. And in all that 70 years, near enough, nobody's ever explained to me what I should look for. And nobody's ever explained to me what I should do when I stand up here. So I do what I do, and you do what you do. But nobody ever tells us about this important thing, gives us the rules. I'd like, in a way, to give you all a piece of paper and ask you to fill out this, just this. What are you expecting me to do this morning? You've come here, out on this cold morning, damp morning. Why? What do you expect from me? How do you know I've done it? What are you going to say when you go home? Well, that was a waste of time, or whatever. What are you going to say? What are you looking for? And I'd like to take this piece of paper, you can do it anonymously, and I'd be very interested to see what you would write down. I wonder how many of us would write the same thing down. What are you expecting? And I'd like to say to the preachers, and I'll say it to myself, when I'm standing up here, what do I think I ought to be giving you? I've been thinking about this in the past week. What have I been thinking about? And why? See, I said it was going to be an odd sermon. But nobody ever tells us about these things, do they? Well, as I say, the balance has changed for me. Now, will it offend you if I say this? Because I'm hearing more sermons, I find myself having listened to these sermons, if I can manage to get through to the end, I find myself asking sorts of questions to myself like this. Well, what was the point of that? What was he trying to do? And I've come to the conclusion that quite a few men stand in pulpits and they don't really know why they're there. I mean, I'm not asking you to agree with me, I'm just telling you what I think. I say to myself, does that man know why he's there? What did he try to do this morning? Now, this address is going to have a lot more illustrations in it. You'll find that in Preaching in Preachers of Lloyd Jones, by the way. He very rarely gave illustrations when he preached, but those lectures were full of illustrations. Well, let's ask a parallel question. When you go to your GP, why do you go? Do you know? Or is it just a social visit? Oh, I'd like to go and see him. No, you go for a reason, don't you? You've got a pain or a discomfort or a problem or an issue, whatever it might be. I'm going to my surgery on Wednesday. I'm not going because I think it's a good idea. I've been advised to have a blood test, so I'm going to have a blood test. I'm going for a reason. And I'm expecting the nurse to jab a needle in. I go to the GP. What do I expect him to do? Does he know why he's there? What's he about? Is he there to give me a lecture on disease? I want him, if necessary, or her, to get their hands on me and do something for my discomfort or whatever it is. I don't know if I'm unique in that, but I go when I got trouble and I want answers for my trouble. I want help. Now it strikes me, I'm not a doctor, I might be wrong, but I wonder if some doctors know why they're in the GP profession. They seem to be more interested in the screen than in me. They seem to be more interested in the figures on that screen than me. I've been to GP doctors, and they tell me, well, you must be all right. The tests say it. I don't feel all right. I know I'm not all right, but they tell me I am all right because the figures are right. No, I'm not despising figures and tests, but they haven't looked at me. I wonder that about some of the preachers. Now, I better get to my text, hadn't I? Otherwise you'll think I'm just ranting on. There are two things in this text that stand out to me. Naaman gets there, and he comes with his horses and his chariot and all the other baggage that he's got. And he's standing at the door, and Elisha said, you come here, and you'll be cured. And so Naaman's the going, and he's got some expectation. We know he's got expectation because it's not in my discourse this morning, but it will be in the next one. When Elisha speaks to him, Naaman said, that's not what I expected. I expected he would do this and that and the other. But Elisha didn't do this and that and the other. He did something else. You see, their expectations didn't meet, his expectations didn't meet Elisha's action. You see what I'm saying? How did Elisha act? What did he do? And I'm using this morning to make 2 points. And I'm making those points as applications or illustrations, whatever you want, of preaching. It's not the whole business of preaching. I'm not saying that. But I believe there are two key things in Elisha's response to Naaman that I don't get very often in the sermons that I hear. And that's why I'm passionately upset about it. Because I think Elisha here has pressed the right button twice. Right. What do I mean? Well, I've just illustrated it to you about a GP, if there is such a thing, but this is the impression I get, they're more interested in the screen than in me. Now, if I'm wrong about that, forgive me. I apologize. But I think today we've got so many tests and so many wonderful meters and ability to measure this and everything else and probabilities. It's all a question of facts and figures and all that sort of thing. I think a bit of the old-fashioned medicine where the chap got his hands on me and felt me and knew what was wrong and advised me, I'd rather have a dose of that. Now, where do I get this in this text? Well, you may say it's speculation, but I believe it's justified. But you may not like what I'm going to say, but this is how I see it. Here is Naaman. He's got his chariot. He's got his horses. He's got all this paraphernalia of gold and silver and changes of clothes and all that sort. He's a big man, isn't he? He is a big man. He's a great man. He's a field marshal. General Montgomery don't come into it. Now, you didn't cross General Montgomery, Field Marshal Montgomery. You didn't cross him. You didn't cross Patton, the American. This man has got so many ribbons on his chest, it's like a herbaceous border. He's wearing so many gongs, he's like the Russian generals, way down with the stuff. It says in this passage that he's a great man. He talked to kings. He was intimate with kings. And he's come at the gate with all his paraphernalia, chariots and what have you, And what does Elisha do? Well, Elisha comes down and he bows and scrapes. Not at all. He sends a messenger to the man. He sends a lackey. He doesn't even come out to the gate to see him. Now, what do I deduce from that? I believe Elisha has summed this man up. He's got him. This man is a big man. He's an important man. And the first thing that Elisha has to do is to humble him and bring him down to size. And he does that by not coming bowing and scraping, but sending a messenger. Now you may say, well, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Well, it's a mountain to me. What do I mean? Imagine the door opens now and 4 people come in. A man and his wife and his son and his wife. And you all recognize them. Charles, Camilla, William, is it? And Kate. And they come and sit there. I know it's daft, but imagine it. What should I do? Well, this is what I hope I'd do. I'd explain to them what I'm doing, how far I've got, and just carry on. And I hope I would make it clear to the four of them that they, though they're kings and queens and all the rest of it, are poor mortal sinners like we all are. And we're all going to face judgment. And we need to know where we stand. And we need to be right with God, and only Christ can save us. And all the rest of it. If afterwards you came to me and said, you preached 2 different sermons this morning. You preached to us, and then when they came in, you were very different. Well, in a sense, there would be a difference. But if my message, if the point I was making changed in the wrong way, I'm sure you understand what I mean, that would be a terrible curse upon me, that I changed. These are poor mortals, and they need to be saved. One of the terrible things about our royal family is they go to churches if they ever hear a preacher. Do they ever get a man who tells them the truth? Oh, I don't know. But I'll tell you one king I know about. You all know him, King James. He's the man who's responsible for the Bible you use. When he came south from Scotland, he'd been king in Scotland for several years. He was James VI. And when he came south to England, he became James I of England. He was mightily relieved to travel south. He was a Scotsman. His mother was Mary, Queen of Scots. But he was glad to leave Edinburgh. Do you know why? He wanted to get south, to get away from the Kirk, the Scottish Church. Why? Because the presbyters there, they preached to him as though he was a man. They treat me as a man. Well, that's exactly what he was. But when he came south, he had bishops. And he said, no bishop, no king. I like the bishops, he said. Yes. Because they preached, most of them, what he wanted to hear. You see the point I'm making? Elisha looked at Naaman and he saw what he was. A proud man, a big man, an important man. And for that reason, he treated him in this way. He sent a messenger to him. My friend, the preaching I hear today, this is my experience. Why is that man up in the pulpit? Is he concerned with me, or is he concerned with something else? My impression is that most of the preaching I hear, yours may be different, but most of the preaching I hear is this: the man is more concerned with his notes than he is with me. Now, I've got a thing about notes, but don't worry about that. A man uses notes, fair enough. I used to use notes, but they got in the way, so I don't. Okay. But in the old days, my experience was I tried to disguise that I was using notes. I used to pretend I wasn't. I had ways of doing it, and so did you. Yeah, so did you. Yeah, we all did. But today, my experience is they're actually doing this. They're turning it over, or their laptops, or their PowerPoints, or whatever it is. It's a big thing for them. They're more interested in this piece of paper than they are in me. What do I mean? They've studied all the week. They've worked the text out. They've studied the text, they've looked at the commentaries, they've really got into the Greek and the Hebrew, they've looked at it, and they've got their notes, they've got their 25 points, and they're going to give me those 25 points. What happens in the gathering is no importance. It's the notes which carry. Now, don't misunderstand me. The text is all important. But the man is there to deal with me. And I've gone for him to deal with me. From the Word of God, yes, but to deal with me as I am. I said I'd give you bags of illustrations. I went to my GP 40 years ago, and I was feeling rotten. And I went to see him several times. And he diagnosed me, and I didn't agree with him. I didn't believe it. I was a schoolmaster at the time, head of maths in a comprehensive school, and I felt awful. And he told me what it was. I didn't believe it. He said it was stress. I didn't believe it. I thought I was eating something wrong, or not eating something, or, it was something else. Not enough salt, not enough iodine, not enough, whatever it was. I tried eating rice biscuits. I tried all sorts. I look back upon those days, what I tried to do. And he told me it's stress. I didn't believe it. But one day, he said to me, are those your pens in your coat pocket, the breast pocket? Are those your pens? The school where I was at, they issued us with cheap biros, Bics. I don't know if they still make them. They're clear tubes with coloured tops and coloured tails, I'll call them. Blue, red, and black I had. And I had a blue and a red and a black in my pocket. Biros, sticking out, blue, red, black. And he said to me, are those your pens? And I looked down, I said, yeah. And I saw what he meant. He diagnosed me by looking at my pens. He got me, he summed me up by looking at my pens. What did he see? I didn't know it, but in the classroom, I would take these pens out of my pocket, one of them, and I'd put it in my mouth, and I'd be chewing on it. And I chewed these pens until they were all flayed and bitten and all stretched out and flaky. He saw the tension in the classroom through my pen tops. He knew about me, do you see? I'll give no names now, but some of you will work it out. A friend of mine who stands in this pulpit was one day in Cambridge. And he attended a service in Cambridge where, this is 2 or 3 years back, 3 or 4 years back, and he attended this service in Cambridge, and the man who was preaching was quite a famous preacher. But he was preaching in a church congregation. They didn't have their own building. And this congregation hired a church building. I think it may have been St. Andrew's the Great. I'm not sure, the one you mentioned just now. But it certainly hired a famous building, a historic building. And the service was going on, and my friend was in the congregation. Your friend too, you all know him. And strange things would happen. People would come in during the service and stand at the back. They were visitors to the town. They'd come from America, Russia, Australia, China, anywhere. And they would stand at the back for about 5 minutes. They'd be looking around the building, looking at the historical building. And this preacher was preaching. And my friend noticed something. What did he notice? That the preacher just ground on as though they were not there. He'd been droning on beforehand. They came in for 5 minutes and just stood there. And he droned on while they were there. And then when they went, he carried on droning. He paid no attention to the fact that these people had come in, and maybe for 5 minutes in their life, they would hear the gospel if he preached it. But he didn't pay any attention to them. Now, I don't very often tell stories about myself to credit, but this is the truth. When I was at Lowestoft, preaching there regularly, the friends all knew, because I kept telling them, if anybody comes in, I'll forget you and I'll talk to him or her. And I think that's right. Elisha knew what this man needed, and he dealt with him in the way that suited him. I want preachers that deal with me. Some preachers don't even look at the congregation. There was a man who used to go to Cowan in Wiltshire, and he would preach with his eyes closed. There might be no congregation there, it didn't matter. He had his notes, you see. Well, actually, he was a gospel standard man, so he wouldn't have any notes, but he had his ideas, and he was just preaching. It didn't matter if anybody was listening or not. By the way, this is one of the curses, and I'm part of it, I admit it, of the internet and audio sermons. There's a detachment from the preacher and the people. There's a break. There shouldn't be this break. It's something going on between us. You contribute to me. I know whether you're getting it or not, and I want you to get it. Spurgeon. The orphan children would be there in the congregation. You know the orphanages? Right. And he'd see a boy, and he'd, reaching out his hand, tug the plait of a little girl. What did Spurgeon do? This is what he said. You'll find it in his lectures. He said, I drop in a story, he said, to tell him, to catch his attention and bring it back. In other words, he knew what was going on, and he fitted it. He fitted it. He didn't change his message, you understand. I don't know if I'm conveying to you what I think. I want a man to deal with me. I'm interested in his text, yes, but I can read his books. I can read his notes. I can understand, but I want him to deal with me. I've got an immortal soul, and I need to be dealt with. I can't stand the taste of paper. I've had enough of it. I want something living. Give me Tyndale's man, the ploughboy. His English may be crackers, but I want him to deal with me. If he's got the spirit, that's what I want. I better get on. The second point, there's 2 points. What did Elisha say to them? This is what he said. Tell him, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times and you'll be clean. Now, the point I want to make about this is this. It's another point which is important to me. Elisha does not beat about the bushes. He doesn't play ring-a-ring of roses. He goes straight for the jugular. Tell him to go and wash, and he'll be clean. A command and a promise. Yeah? Go and wash, and you'll be cured. Oh, well, you're making it up. Okay, no. Let's go to Acts 16. Here's the Philippian jailer. What must I do to be saved? Well, now, that's a difficult question. What did Paul say? What does Silas say? Believe, trust, rely on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you might be, no, you will be saved. There's a command, trust, and there's a promise. You will be saved. You might not like what he said. Naaman didn't like what Elisha said. But you can't mistake it. The preachers I hear treat us all as believers. It's all us and we all day long. I'm not the first to say that. Lloyd Jones said it. Lloyd Jones said when he was a young man, going back 100 years now, or more, 120 years, 110 years. The preachers we heard, he said, he was a Calvinistic Methodist man, but the preachers we heard, he said, treated us all as believers. And we weren't. His own wife was not converted until she heard Lloyd Jones as her husband. Isn't that amazing? Spurgeon, you all know the story. 15-year-old boy. He felt rotten. He was convicted of his sin. And he felt miserable about it. And he was going to chapel one Sunday morning, and it was a snowy day in January. And he trudged through the snow, and he couldn't get to the usual chapel. It was too thick, the snow. And so he turned into a primitive Methodist chapel in Artillery Road in Colchester. He just turned in, it was the place he could reach. And he sat under the gallery. And he felt rotten. There was hardly anybody there. And the preacher didn't turn up. It was too snowy. He couldn't get there. So this local man, who wasn't a preacher, thought something should be done. So he got up into the pulpit and he opened his Bible at Isaiah 45. And he read verse 22, "Look unto me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth." And he read it. And he was no preacher, so he read it again. And then he tried to say some remarks on it. He didn't get very far. And then he read it again. And then he saw Spurgeon, this strange lad, sitting there. And this is what he did. He said, young man, he said, you look very miserable. Now Spurgeon said, I sat up at that. He'd been used to sermons, you see. He'd gone to chapel. His grandfather was an independent minister, and he used to go to the chapel with his grandfather. And he was used to sermons, plenty of them. But he said, I was not used to this. Nobody ever spoke to me like that in preaching before. Nobody ever addressed me. What talking to me? He said, but it was a blow well struck. A blow well struck. He said, I was miserable. I knew I was a sinner. But the man went on. Young man, you look very miserable. And you always will be miserable. Unless you do what my text says. Look! Spurgeon said he cried out as only a primitive Methodist could, look! And he said, I did look. I did look. The man had no notes. He had no construction. He just told Spurgeon to look, and Spurgeon did look. I want a bit of that, my friend, in preaching. I heard a man recently, well, I didn't listen all the way through, but I did get to the end, because at the end, the last 2 minutes, quite often, a preacher who's never dealt with sinners, never dealt with us individually, never pointedly, in the last few minutes, he might just come to a bit of gospel. He might. But what this man did, he was doing a chapter. He had his 25 points, or whatever it was, 25 P's or Z's, whatever it was. It was all very well constructed. And he came to the last verse, and then he said, Amen, and sat down. He came to deliver the text. And he delivered his notes on the text, and that was enough. It's like me going to the GP, so I got a lecture on stomach problems. No, I've got a stomach problem. I want help for my stomach. It's me. Nathan didn't give David a lecture on sin and all the rest of it. He said, "Thou art the man." I'm talking to you, King Charles. I'm talking to you. That's what we want a bit of. A bucket of. I said I felt passionate about this, and so do I. I do. I'm sorry it's been, well, I'm not sorry, but I'll apologize if you like. It's been a rambling old collection of illustrations and so on. But these 2 points stand out to me. Yes, the text is important. Yes, of course. But I want preachers to deal with me. And I hope you want preachers to deal with you. And I don't want round and round the bushes. I want to come straight to the point. Come unto me, says Christ. I heard the voice of Jesus say, go and attend some lectures. Read this. Take this course. No. Come unto me. I came to Jesus. That's what Bonner said. I came to Jesus. Yeah. It's too simple, isn't it? I'm a solid 5-point Calvinist. I'll make no apology for it. But give me an Arminian that preaches the gospel to me rather than any Calvinist who gives me the Westminster Confession. Let's have some life. A friend was reading to me this morning a bit by Thomas Manton. And it was an illustration from the sundial. And Thomas Manton made the point about a sundial. You've got to get the angle right. You've got to get the direction right. You know, it's all got to be right. You've got to have the carving right on the sundial. I used to have a sundial in my garden. Most of the time it's useless. Oh, it's set up right, the angle's right, the gnomon or whatever you call it, the angle's right and everything, but it's useless. Why? Because it's either night time or else there's no sun. My friend, that's what I find about a lot of preaching. It may be correct, I don't know. It may be well set out, well constructed. It's not even read well, but it might be read well. But there's no oomph in it. There's no life in it. There's no sun shining on it. Naaman didn't like what he heard. My friend, I'd rather have a man who says, I can't stand what you preach. The worst thing he could say is, I'm bored when you preach. Okay, this has perhaps been a waste of time for most of you, but for me, at least, it's been important. God, give us men who know what they're about. They are dealing with us, and they're coming straight to the point, not going all around the bushes, and giving us the gospel, Christ, right where it is. May God raise such men in our time. Just think about it, my friend, all the words that are being uttered this morning, and what little success there seems to be in it. There must be a reason for this. May we have such power given to us that we shall see again great turnings to God under the preaching of the gospel. But I think what we're doing at the moment is a long way short in most cases. Oh, I'll have to sit down and shut up. But may God bless his word. Go and wash. If you've never come to Jesus, go to Jesus and be saved. That's the message of the gospel. May God bless him. Amen.